binge that the Democrats call a COVID relief bill has passed. I want to begin with a quick rundown of the major stories, then come back to what is a certain inflation generator. And when the inflation comes, and inflation is nasty, and many of you don't remember the late 70s and the early 80s, when inflation comes, it will be the Biden inflation. So just write it down. A year ago, actually 14 months ago in January, I was warning everyone every morning about the China virus, the Wuhan plague, what has become known as COVID. And last January, I was urging public tracking of everyone who came in. And no one believed me. President Trump didn't believe me. The Democrats didn't believe me. People listening to the show thought I was out of my mind. But we've got the audio. We played it for you many, many times on a daily basis. I said, this is bad and it's going to get worse. All right. But it took 3 months for that to show up. It's going to take actually about a year for the Biden inflation to show up. We are going to have a massive year GDP-wise. It's going to be one great year of growth. And then the hangover. The hangover is coming. Oh my gosh, the hangover is coming. Let me run down this third COVID-19 stimulus package, according to the Wall Street Journal, could jolt U.S. growth, revive inflation in 2021. They expect, according to some experts, 6% GDP growth. Some people believe it will be higher than that. Projected that employers will add 514,000 jobs a quarter over the next jobs a month in the next year. So we're going to have a great year. It's going to be like having every credit card you have max out and live high. And then the bill comes due. You can't increase the national debt of the United States accumulated since 1789 by 10% in 3 months, 8 weeks actually. And there's a reason we haven't done this before. That reason is called economics. The massive amount of money. Look, this is a blue state bailout. Every government employee is clicking their heels everywhere in the United States. Nobody's going to get laid off. No belts are going to be tightened. No taxes are going to be cut. They actually forbade tax cuts. Mitch McConnell was asked about it at a press conference yesterday. It's the single key quote on that. Let's play cut number 4.
The president will soon be signing the $1.9 trillion stimulus bill. I think the most distinct features are the following. Number one, it solved New York's budget problem. So finally some good news for Governor Cuomo. Senator Schumer has solved his financial issues. They've also, by the way, solved the financial problems of San Francisco. They've also prevented state governments from lowering taxes. This is a classic example of big government Democratic overreach in the name of COVID relief. And we all know that what we should have been doing and would have been done had this been a bipartisan discussion instead of a jam the other side approach is $500 or $600 billion directly targeted at the problem. But of course, the $1.9 trillion problem, as we said repeatedly, the $1.9 trillion package, as we said repeatedly, only had about 1% or less for vaccines, 9% or less for health care. So I think this is actually one of the worst pieces of legislation I've seen pass here in the time I've been in the Senate.
No, he's right. And the Biden inflation is coming. The lead story over at CNN pre-market, the world went on a debt binge last year. There could be a nasty hangover. It's going to be called inflation. Meanwhile, confidence of U.S. executives soars. The Business Roundtable says everybody's optimistic. I am. I'm so glad I own real estate. I'm so glad I have money in the stock market and not in bonds. I'm so glad I don't have cash because cash is dumb right now because inflation is going to take it away from you. But all the employers out there say it's going to be a great year. What does the COVID-19 stimulus bill mean for loan forgiveness, financial aid, and college students? The Wall Street Journal says a lot. A lot of students are going to get partial loan forgiveness. A lot of students are going to get new financial aid, go deeper into the hole. Colleges that are inefficient and teach basket weaving are going to get a big bailout. Colleges like Hillsdale that don't take any federal aid is going to get nothing. States expected COVID-19 to bring widespread tax shortfalls. It didn't happen. I love this article in the Wall Street Journal. There aren't massive state tax falls. There have been massive destruction of small businesses, but the COVID bill does nothing for them. Then there is the Wall Street Journal headline. I love this one the most. The progressive Democrat steamroller. The $1.9 trillion spending bill is only a taste of what's coming. Not true. Joe Manchin again yesterday said he is not going to be not going to support at all any filibuster changes. So they get one more bill. They get another reconciliation bill in which they will raise taxes and spend money on infrastructure. It will be another spending binge. Democrats spend money, and they do it in ways that are irresponsible, and we're going to get crushed. There is a great analysis in the Washington Post, how the $1.9 trillion U.S. stimulus package compares with other countries' coronavirus spending. Understand that the 1.9 comes on top of $4 trillion. We spent $6 trillion in 1 year. $6 trillion. That's 6 years of deficit in 6 months. It is so much more than the rest of the world has spent. We may have spent more on ourselves than the world spent everywhere else. In Japan, they had a $707 billion stimulus bill on top of two previous packages that amounted to $2.2 trillion. So they spent about $3 trillion. We spent about $6 trillion. So we spent twice as much as Japan. All right, twice as much. It's all borrowed money. Now let me give you some good news. Israeli scientists discovered that aspirin may protect against COVID-19. People who take small doses are 29% less likely to test positive. That's in the Times of Israel. We also find an enormous border crisis. Facing pressure, Biden administration scrambles to shelter migrant children. And we've got Jen Psaki mixing it up with Peter Doocy yesterday, cut number 6.
You mentioned those CDC guidelines. Does the White House think it's a problem that when the CDC tells these migrant shelter facilities that they can be at full capacity if they are careful about COVID, many of them do, but when the CDC tells schools that they can open in person at full capacity, many of them don't?
Is there a school in particular that you have as an example that didn't do that?
Are most schools in this country at full capacity with in-person learning?
Is there a specific school, though, that is not following the CDC guidelines of implementing the mitigation steps so they can reopen?
I mean, the CDC is saying schools, you can be every school can be at full capacity.
With the CDC guidelines, just to be clear, because I think this is very important to be very clear and specific on, they gave 8 mitigation steps that schools can take to safely reopen. A number of schools have actually recently reopened. Schools in Washington, D.C., some have, schools in many districts across the country. But each school district needs to make the decision about whether they are able to take those mitigation steps. The president has also been clear, some of these school districts need additional funding. There's $160 billion in this package that he's going to sign into law later this week. The Secretary of Education will be quite focused on working with school districts to help them reopen. But more school districts are reopening. More kids are in classrooms every single day.
But since they are not all back, from an administration position or from your perspective, have the Border Patrol unions and the HHS unions been easier to work with than the teachers' unions?
I think that's a little bit of mixing different circumstances. I would say that
it's children all in tight quarters. I mean, a classroom.
Not quite.
It's not funny.
Not quite. I would say that let's take a responsible approach to the two issues, okay? One is schools reopening. There's been 8 mitigation steps that have been announced by the CDC to implement, right?
Yeah.
Every school district is going to work to implement those on a timeline that is they can effectively do. Many school districts are reopening, right? Many are reopening every single week and day and week, right? That is a different circumstance than what we are seeing at the border. And the HHS oversees these facilities, right? They're working on ensuring we can have more kids safely. They are working to implement CDC guidelines, but they are different circumstances, and certainly we're working with the school districts, and we're also working with HHS to open these facilities or to ensure that kids are treated with safety and care in these facilities.
This is nonsense. In fact, they are jamming them into the same cells that the Trump administration used. Meanwhile, schools are closed across the United States. You know if your child is working from the kitchen counter. You know that. So Jen Psaki's just not telling you the truth. Just remember that. Just remember that. More on the rundown coming up. Don't go anywhere, America.